So just so everybody knows, we are recording this session and I'll put it on a private YouTube channel and then we'll get a link to it from the Croquet New South Wales website. So if you don't want to be visible, you're very welcome to turn your camera off, and you can turn your camera on and off depending on what you choose. The speaker view will give you only the main speaker and everybody else will be down the sidebar. So when somebody is giving the presentation, that's probably the best view to use, and that should be on the top right of your computer. You will have received some notes from David. I'm not sure if you all got them. I sent them today.
No, I didn't get them.
Okay, so they'll be in your email. However, David will be talking to those notes, so it's not as though you're going to miss anything. And those notes will go online with the recording after the session. I'm now going to actually mute everybody so that we can just make sure that David is able to speak without having interruptions. David, you'll have to unmute yourself, which you can do. I was going to also ask people, if you think of a question, and we'll have time for questions after David's presentation. I think his presentation will take perhaps 20 minutes, do you think, David?
Something like that, yep.
There'll be plenty of time for questions. If you think of something along the way, because there's quite a lot of information he's conveying, you can click on the chat button and type a question in, and that means we will address those questions in a kind of orderly fashion. And there will also be the opportunity to use the reactions button at the bottom and raise your hand and ask a question verbally as well. So there's a couple of ways that you can do that. And some people have already raised questions. Thank you very much. So David will address those during the presentation. I want to introduce David. You probably mostly know him. He's the chair of the Croquet New South Wales Tournaments Committee, and he seems to turn up to lots of tournaments. I've certainly seen him many times. David is he's been president of Camaret and Croquet Club. He joined Croquet in about 2009, which he said was too late. He should have joined sooner. And he began playing. He's also been currently treasurer of Cooks River Croquet Club. He's a very keen AC player. He's a examining referee, and he plays. He certainly plays in quite a lot of tournaments when he's got time from being a tournament manager. So I'd very much like to welcome David. He's got a lot of experience, and I think you'll find his presentation really helpful. So thank you, David.
Thanks, Kate. I won't go through everything that I've written. It's fairly detailed, a lot of it. But I do want to say thank you all for turning up. It's great to see so many people from right across New South Wales. It's really good to see people interested in running tournaments from all around. Hopefully, as a result of this workshop and other efforts, we'll create a few more people happy to manage Croquet New South Wales events, either in Sydney or in the local areas. Thanks to those of you who asked questions. I'll attempt to answer those. Most of the questions were about how to construct a draw, so I'll spend most of my time on that. The other questions I will touch on, and other aspects of running a tournament I'll touch on, but fairly briefly. Happy to expand on those later if you want to. So, first of all, there are preliminary tasks. You need to decide whether the tournament is going to be level or handicap. You need to decide what sort of games you're going to play. In AC, you're going to play 26-point games, or 18-point games, maybe 14-point games. In GC, you're going to use the standard 13-point games, or maybe 19 points. This needs to be decided in advance and made known to possible participants before they register. The other thing to be aware of is the number of games a day you're likely to want to be playing. That will depend on your target audience. If you're running a GC Open event, you're probably looking at 7 games a day. If you're looking at an AC bronze level event, it's pretty difficult to get people happy to play more than 2 games a day. And many of them have never played 2 games a day before they come to a New South Wales tournament. So that needs to be borne in mind and look at how long you need for the tournament. There are various other things. Understand whether your likely participants are more interested in croquet as a social experience or as a competitive experience. Both approaches are totally valid, but it's good to know it's silly to run a very competitive tournament if most of you people are looking for a social time, and vice versa. You need to give some thought to handicap range if you're restricting your tournament to a particular handicap range. Maybe it's Division 2 in GC or Silver in AC. You need to think about what happens if somebody enters on the lower handicap for that range at the time of entry, but by the time you come to run it, they've dropped down below that. Croquet New South Wales has a rule for doing that. The other thing you need to think about is if you're running, say, a Division 2 GC event, but somebody on a handicap of 9, that's a Division 3 level entry, isn't it? They want to play anyway to get the experience. Do you accept their entry? Do you take into account whether accepting your entry is going to unbalance the field, whether it's going to give you too many players for the time you've got available? So all of those things need to be thought about so that when somebody says, hey, I'm an armed, I'd like to play, that's not the time that you start thinking about it, that you've given it some thought beforehand. A major part of running a tournament is getting volunteers. Preferably, if you're the tournament manager, getting volunteers other than yourself. That can be difficult, and it's not unusual to find the tournament manager setting the hoops in the morning of the game, recording the scores, managing the tournament, finding referees, and generally writing a report at the end. It's really good if it's a big tournament. You can get other members of your club to do that. They'll enjoy the experience, almost certainly, and you'll enjoy the event much better. The recording of scores is important. These days we have croquet scores. I would encourage you to use that for any event that you run. Is anybody not familiar with croquetscores.com? Put your hand up if you're not, by using a thing. I can't see any hands up. Oh, I better look at the other screen. Oh, there is. I've moved away from where the hand was. Petula. Croquet Scores is a system that was set up mainly by Tim Murphy in Canberra with help from other people around the place, including Peter Freer, I think, including Kevin Beard. It's available to croquet players around the world to record results of tournaments. And you can go in there and look at tournaments from all around the world, see who's playing, see how they're doing, send them a congratulations if they win, commiserations if they lose, and generally keep in touch. It's a very valuable tool which Tim has created. And certainly for Croquet New South Wales event, we encourage anybody running those, or we in fact require anybody running a New South Wales event to put the results onto Croquet Scores. You need to think about whether you're going to have a tournament handicapper to largely to catch the burglars who sometimes turn up. That can be particularly the case where an isolated club doesn't get much competition with other clubs, and the handicaps there might be a bit artificial. That person comes along to a tournament where there are players from 6 or 8 different clubs, and all of a sudden they can feel that or the others can feel that their handicap is wrong. The job of the tournament handicapper is to spot that and to say, you're incorrectly handicapped, you're a much better player than that, or you're not as good as that, and to allocate a handicap that's suitable. This applies whether it's a handicap or a level event. The other thing you need to think about is referees. If it's a New South Wales event, an approach should be made to the State Director of Refereeing for AC or GC to get them to appoint a tournament referee. That's difficult at the moment because there's no State Director of GC refereeing, as I understand it. Hopefully that situation will be rectified. And the job then of appointing on-field referees is up to the tournament referee to do. And quite often, if you're the tournament manager and you know a bit about refereeing, you'll finish up as the tournament referee as well. Okay, the main part of it is to do a good draw. A draw which will satisfy everybody who comes along to play, no matter what level of player they are, where they'll go away feeling they've been treated well, that they've had fun, preferably playing their games, that they haven't been unnecessarily beaten up by much better players. If there's only one less good player in the field, that's a bit unavoidable. But if there are more than one, you want to get them to have games against one another. The format of the draw, there'll generally be 3 parts, not all of which might be used. The first will be block play, the next will be knockout play, and in conjunction with that, there'll be a plate. Sometimes you just have block play. If 4 people turn up to play the tournament, you're going to play a double round robin probably. In fact, if it's a GC game with only 4, you're probably going to do everything you can to get at least 2 more players. 4 players playing GC, even a triple round robin's over in a day and it becomes a bit of a non-event. If it's a top level event, such as we had in the AC Open Singles last weekend, we had 8 players, so we played a knockout right from the start. We didn't have block play, we played a seeded knockout. Another possibility, if it was, say, a Division 2 singles, or let's say Division 3. My view of Division 3, partly an intelligent assumption, but perhaps not, is that people playing Division 3 who go along to a state tournament would like to play as many of the other players as they can and have a good time doing it. And if they get a bye now and again during the day, that's all of the good as well. Whereas an open GC state title, the people are coming along there to play serious croquet, and the important thing to do there is to come up with a draw that will guarantee that the person who's playing the best croquet over those few days gets to win the event. You don't want to create a situation where one fluke event by a player can knock out the top player if you can avoid it. So let's look at block play. Recently, I think it was Division 2 doubles, we had, I think, 17 or 18 pairs, maybe more. We played 3 blocks, relatively equal in ability, and then we took a couple from each block plus the best 2 third places into a final. In the Division 2 singles, I think we had about 13 players and we played just a 13-player round robin. Maybe it was 14. We had 3 days to play it. A 14-player round robin fitted in pretty easily on Canberra's 3 lawns, so we did that. If it had been an open event with 14, I'd have played 2 blocks of 7, followed by some serious best of 3 knockouts. So you need to take account of the level of play you're expecting to have turn up. Sometimes you play a block, 7 or 8, and that's all you do. In AC, a block of 8 at bronze level will take you 3.5 days to play, unless you adopt my recent innovation, which is reducing bronze game to 2 hours and having 3 sessions a day and making sure people are happy to play 3 games of slightly shorter duration occasionally. But not all tournaments will have 3.5 days available. People are pressed for time. A lot more people who work are playing in tournaments, and we need to be conscious of how long it can take. I'm not sticking very closely to the notes, so I encourage you to read them at your leisure anyway. Doing the draw for the blocks, there are any number of so-called standard draws available on the internet. Some are quite good, some are pretty horrible. The ideal thing for a draw is to have the best player in the block play the worst player in the block to start with, then the second worst and the third worst, and finish up at the end playing the second best player in the block based on previous games. This maximises the chance that the best game of the event will be played at the end, and people are interested to see, oh, you know, Kate and Derek have both won all their games so far, now they're going to play in what's effectively a final. That's good unless you're playing a couple of blocks and you're going to take, say, 2 players from each block. What you want to have happen then is you want second playing third in the last round, because that's likely to be the crunch game, the important game. The person who's running third, we're doing everything they can to knock off the first or second best player, and their best chances presumably against the second best. So keep that to last to have a bit of edge to that, so that the hopes of both those players are still alive getting to the final. Uneven blocks can present a problem. Oh, I'm sorry, coming back to selecting blocks from blocks to go into a knockout. Let's say you've got 3 blocks and you want to play an 8-person knockout. What you need to do is take the winner and runner-up from each block, and then 2 out of the 3 third place getters. How do you decide which 2 to take? It'll depend a bit on the importance of the event. It might be that you'll take the 2 that have the best number of wins, running third, and if number of wins are equal, take the best net hoops. Net hoops are equal, perhaps take the best gross hoops. If they're all still equal, then you need some sort of a tiebreaker, which can be as simple as a coin toss, or as complicated or as long as another game, a tie-break game. Having a tie-break game, that might be the same type of game as the ones you've played in the blocks. So a 13-point GC game, 26-point AC game. Or you might play a shorter version of the game. In GC, you might play a 5-pointer or a 3-pointer. It's even been known to play a 1-point game, hasn't it, Peter Freer? I tried that in the GC Open singles this year, a 1-point GC game starting from corner 2 for hoop 2. And it was very interesting to see what people did. I'm not sure we'll do it again, but it was fun on the day. One chap who misunderstood the directions to score hoop 2 from corner 2 actually ran hoop 7 from corner 2 and realised that he still had to run hoop 2. But that will depend on what time you've got available and how many tiebreaks. You might have 3 third places all equal, in which case you need to come up with a method of choosing 2 out of the 3. If the blocks are uneven in number, let's say you had 2 blocks of 8 and a block of 7, then how do you judge the best third place? They've probably all had, say, 4 wins, but presumably the person who's had 4 wins in a block of 8 isn't as good as a person who's had 4 wins in a block of 7. So what I would do there is look at the percentage of wins. So 4 out of 7 is a better percentage than 4 out of 8, but it's not as good as 5 out of 8. If you get to net hoops, I'll be looking at percentage of hoops scored to hoops conceded rather than net hoops. The best thing is to try to avoid uneven blocks. Seeding the knockout from the blocks, it's important to try to avoid what are known as block clashes. So if you've got 4 blocks and taking 2 from each block, which is nice and simple, you don't want 2 players from block A meeting unless they're the last 2 players in the knockout for preference. So the idea would be to have each half of the block should have 1 player from each block. So I've suggested you might have the winner of A block, the runner-up of C block, the runner-up of B block, and the winner of D block in the top half, and the winners of B and C and the runners-up of A and B in the bottom half, so that nobody will have to play somebody they've met in the block unless they get through to the final stage. In seeding blocks, some people try to avoid family clashes. I haven't mentioned this in the notes, something I thought about later. My view is that you should not do that. And it's largely based on the fact that there are a number of families where one partner in the family, husband and wife or brothers, is one of the top players, likely to be one of the top players in the field, and the other family member is a few positions off that. If you arrange it so that that not so good player always avoids playing his brother, sister, wife or husband, then that's favouritism to them. They should have to, so that Malcolm Elliott should have to play Rob Elliott occasionally other than just in the final, if that's the way the draw works. So Rosie Landry should be playing Peter Landry if that's the way it goes. Kate should be playing Peter Freer if that's the way the draw goes, rather than giving them a draw which means they don't have to meet their partner or brother. That's a bit contentious. Some people think that should be, that clash should be avoided. A similar thing arises with players from the same club. Ideally, in a top-level tournament, you ignore that. People are there, say in the New South Wales Open event, you want to get the best people through. It doesn't matter what club they're from. But if you're playing a GC Division 2 event where people have come from around the state, you're playing, say, in Canberra, and you've got half the field from Canberra and half from other clubs, it's really nice if you can arrange it so the people from other clubs play people from Canberra, and the people from Canberra don't just play one another all the time, which is what they do every weekend. So I'm a bit in favour of mixing the clubs around and doing a block draw, as long as it doesn't unbalance the blocks too much. Court allocations for blocks, and for knockouts for that matter. What I do, having come up with a draw, let's say for an 8-person draw with 3 lawns, I'm going to try to ensure that every player plays 3 games on one lawn, 3 on another lawn and 2 on the third lawn, rather than 4, 2 and 1. Sorry, 3, 2 and 2, 3, 3 and 1 maybe, but not 4, 2 and 1, and certainly not 4, 3 and none on the other lawn. That's not all that difficult to do. It takes a bit of time, but it's worth doing so that people don't feel that they're being either that somebody else is being advantaged by playing all their games on a particular lawn, or somebody else is being disadvantaged by not getting game on what is regarded as a better lawn. At Tempe, that's not such an important consideration. The lawns are all pretty similar. At Sutherland, I think that I want to make sure that with the three lawns of very different nature, that you rotated them pretty well. Another consideration, not just how many games you get in the lawn, but how often do you play in the same lawn twice in a row? Ideally, that would be never, but that can't be achieved. If you look at a block of 4, one is going to play 4 in the first round and 2 will play 3, then one will play 3, 2 will play 4, then one will play 2 and 3 will play 4. Somebody is going to have all their games on one lawn. There's no way of getting around it. So you just accept that and move on. But if you've got a 6-player draw, you should be able to move them around so people don't play more than a couple of games in a row on one lawn, and get a reasonable spread across the different lawns. In making up blocks in a handicap event, if you've got more than one block, there are 2 ways of looking at this. One is to group players of similar handicaps. So block 1 might be handicap all Division 1 players in GC. The next one might be the better half of Division 2 players. And the next one might be the lower half of Division 2 and a few Division 3s. And the 4th block might be mainly the Division 3s on the higher handicaps. This guarantees that by the time we get to the finals, you'll have players representing each handicap range, and that's nice to have. However, it makes life pretty boring for the people, and people don't get experience using many extra turns or bisques if they're all very similarly handicapped. My preference is to make each block a range of handicaps and make it so that the total handicap in each block is approximately the same. Sometimes difficult to do if you've got clusters of people at particular handicap levels, but that's the way I prefer to do it. I suppose the other thing is we've talked about the blocks, we've talked a bit about seeding the knockout. There's a whole series of things about how to seed a knockout event. There's a very interesting article I read the other day about what things you should avoid and what things you should try to achieve. You want to avoid the unexpected or accidental knocking out of a good player by one fluke event. So in the GC, a major GC event, you would try to make best of 3 matches for the knockout rather than single 13-point games. A single 13-point game can relatively easily be won by a weaker player. Much more difficult to win a best of 3 match as a weaker player. So the aim is to get the better players through. And that's not favouritism, it just makes sense to have your final 4 in a knockout be the best 4 players competing. So after the blocks, you populate the plate, you start playing the plate, and people get knocked out in the first round. What do you do with them? A couple of options. They can play in a plate. They might join the people from the blocks who didn't get in the finals playing in the same plate event, depending on numbers. They might go into what's called a Y event. One of the mysteries of croquet that you come across when you start playing in ranking events is the naming of knockouts. The X knockout is the first knockout that's going to be played, and the winner of the X is the winner of the event. Losers generally in the second round, sometimes the first round of the X, go into the Y knockout. Losers in the next round of the X go into the Z. Losers in the next round of the Y go into the W, etc. can be confusing, but it really just gives everybody, as they get knocked out, they go into another knockout consisting of players who got knocked out at the same time as they did. So it continues to give croquet games to people who are no longer in contention for the main prize. And it happens in national events and in international events. It's a pretty well proven method. The point at which you take people out of the knockout and put them into a plate will depend on the size of the knockout, obviously, and how many other people might be in the plate who didn't get into the knockout. And the plate might be a knockout of its own, or it might be one or more blocks. If it's one or more blocks, it's nice to spread the blocks around so people aren't playing all the same people they played in the block that qualified them or didn't qualify them for the knockouts. If you've taken players from one block into the knockout, you might have a block of 8, 4 have gone to the knockout and 4 will play the plate. It might be that the first round, the 2 first round losers in the knockout, you're going to put them into the plate as well to come into a secondary level of the plate to play. You might make that plate just completing a little block which just includes those players but takes into account the game they played in the initial block. That gets a bit complicated to work out, but it's worth doing to keep people getting games to play. There are a lot of variations, of course. I haven't talked about Swiss events. I haven't talked about double elimination events. There are a number of ways of playing those things. Most of them get described pretty well in various places on the internet. And a good starting point is the ACA tournament regulations, which I think Kate is going to send you a link to that later. An important thing is matches rather than games. For high-level events, it's almost mandatory to finish up with best of 3 or even best of 5 matches rather than just single games. This causes the cream to rise to the top, if you like, and can be quite exciting. One other thing I need to mention is time limits. GC players have an abhorrence of time limits for some reasons that are pretty good and some that are, in my view, less good. But I can see the reasons why you don't want time limits. AC players, by and large, grow up right from the start, getting used to time limits. 2.5 hours for a game is pretty common right across the spectrum. And what happens when time runs out is well documented in the laws of association croquet and further amplified sometimes in tournament regulations. So there's no great issue there. There are some events that are played with no time limit, such as the bronze medal, which will be played next weekend. And you just hope that with no time limits, you can still get 7 games played by each player in 2 days. It's a busy weekend. The reason for time limits is to maximise the chance that you'll get the tournament finished in the time you've got available. And if you're the tournament manager, that's a fairly important consideration. If you've allocated Friday, Saturday, Sunday for a tournament, and so have all your players, you don't have to tell them Sunday at 5 o'clock, fellas, you're all going to have to come back tomorrow. Cancel your flight back to Ballina or to Canberra, or you drive back to Newcastle, because I need you all here in the morning. You don't gain too many popularity points for that. So something needs to be done to ensure that you'll get the games played. And the way to do that is to have some sort of a time limit. First option, I guess, is to say, okay, the time for each game will be a particular time. One GC, I'm just talking about GC now, really, because AC, it's just accepted. Depends a bit on how many games you want to get in a day, But let's say you're in daylight saving, you say the time limit is going to be 1¼ hours. You might say instead, after 1 hour, we're going to say if you haven't already completed hoop 9 or hoop 8 or whatever hoop you choose, we're going to give you an extra number of minutes, 15 minutes perhaps, 20 minutes, 10 minutes to finish the game. Another thing, which I don't like very much, is for the tournament manager and presumably the referees to keep a bit of an eye on each game, and if in their opinion the game has become bogged down, to say to the players, you've got another 15 minutes. I don't like that very much at all, because it requires great attention to all games happening if you're the tournament manager. And if you've got, if you're at Tempe with 6 games going at a time on 3 lawns, it's a fair task to go around and decide somebody's bogged down and tell them they've got 15 minutes left. If you haven't made a certain hoop by a certain time method is favoured by a lot of people. It can still mean, I mean, you might have just made the required hoop, but you're battling over the other one. You've been doing that for 20 minutes, or you're going to do it for 20 minutes, so you can finish up with a very long game. My preferred one is just to set a time limit from the start. And one of the objections to that tends to be that people can game the result. They know time's coming close, they're 1 ahead, they'll do everything they can to play negatively rather than trying to run the hoop and risk giving the hoop away. This can be overcome by something we've done recently, which has said that when the whistle blows, each ball from there on has 1 turn. So in doubles, each player has a turn. In singles, each player has 2 turns. So I've just hit the blue ball, the bell goes. Whatever happens, that blue ball happens, but the bell signals that my turn ended for the purpose of time when I hit the ball. Excuse me. Then red has a turn, black has a turn, yellow has a turn, and blue has a turn. This should be enough that if, let's say, black and blue have been gaming it and trying to make things negative, if red and yellow is good enough, you've got 2 turns to get a hoop, to get back level, and perhaps to get another hoop to win. Not easy, but not impossible. So it takes away that complaint about people knowing time's coming and changing their way of playing as a result. We've used that in a number of tournaments. I'm not sure how many times it's actually had to be implemented. Not very many, I think. But after those 4 turns, if the score is then equal, you play 1 more hoop. If it's not, that's the end of the game. That seems to be a pretty acceptable method. I'm sure Peter Freer will have some thoughts on that later on. I suppose tied in with time limits is slow play. And slow play is a real bugbear in both codes, AC and GC. Perhaps more so in AC, because a slow player, particularly in a handicap game, can just monopolise play by taking too long over each shot, taking too long to think about whether they're going to take a biscuit or not. They can keep the better player off the lawn for most of the game, making it impossible when they finally get a turn for them to get in and win the game. In GC, it can be very frustrating, I know, to see somebody who's very, very slow about every shot. And it can cause great delays, not just to the game you're playing in, but to the other game that's sharing the court, because the way we are here with the number of lawns we've got on most venues, most games are going to be double banked. We need referees with the knowledge of what they're permitted to do and with the courage to do what they're permitted to do when they come across a really slow player. And I'll be testing myself out in the 9 and over AC handicap singles next Monday and Tuesday with 3 brand new players who've been playing a few months and a couple of 2 or 3 quite experienced players. So I'll have to see whether I can put my words into action. We could talk about wet weather. We could talk about flexibility, which you need if you get wet weather. You need to think about what you can do to modify the draw on the fly to get things finished. I think that's a bit much to be talking about now. One thing I haven't mentioned at all is COVID-19, because what we're looking at here is tournament management in general, not just this week. Clearly, if you're managing a tournament now, you take into account all the COVID-19 regulations from Croquet New South Wales and from the club you're playing at, and follow them and make sure that your participants follow them as well.
Mm.
Cool. Any questions now that we've got? I see we've got.
Well, thank you, David.
Chat.
Yeah, we've got a few questions in the chat room.
Yep.
So I'm thinking some of them I think have been answered by other players, but Pauline and Michael both asked about using croquet scores for club competitions, and I think Peter Freer answered that it can be as long as you name it clearly so that people understand it's a club competition.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I
not.
have on occasion used it at Camaret for club championship. I don't think we did this year, or did we? I can't remember. But yeah, it helps. It gives you a nice reporting of the results. It does all the adding up of the scores for you, saves you making errors and awarding places particularly to the wrong people.
Yeah. So did Pauline or Michael or Peter Free want to make any further comments on that issue? Just unmute yourself if you do.
Yeah, I've just got a couple of other questions about croquet scores. We haven't been using it, but believe it or not, we've got club championships running, just started now, and I've been using the croquet score try croquet scores. It's their dummy website. I've been using that to set up a draw because I didn't want to stand on any toes by putting. Sorry, just turn that off. Yeah, so I've just been wondering about that a little bit, and so I had a couple of questions about croquet scores. Can you seed within croquet scores, or do you have to do that before you get into croquet scores?
Can you seed within it?
Within it.
Well, when you set up a block of players or a knockout, you enter them whatever order you want, but then you can move them around into the correct order.
Okay, so you can't actually put a handicap or an index into croquet scores and let it seed automatically.
You can it won't seed automatically, but you can put the handicap in there after the player's name if you want to.
Right.
With against the club, Peter Freer does that fairly frequently, I think.
Yep.
I don't.
And the other question I had was can you organise double eliminations within croquet score?
Yes, I've done that for the last 7 years with the Dixon Advisory Croquet Classic, which is a 16-player double elimination. You need to be careful about how you set up your knockouts. You could finish up with 128 slots needed because of the way people drop out and come back in. So I make a number of knockouts, each one of which leads into the next.
And lastly, have you considered, or has anybody considered running a croquet scores Zoom tutorial using the screen sharing capabilities?
I haven't. You'd probably talk to Jim Murphy about that.
Yeah, no, that's a good suggestion if there was a demand for something like that. Yeah, it might be combined with something else, I suspect, such as perhaps using world rankings or something. But yeah, it's a good. Thank you for the suggestion, Michael. I think
it would take a little bit of the intimidation factor out of it for some people.
One thing I should say about croquet scores is that if you're playing an event which is going to qualify for world rankings, then it's a very good idea to put into croquet scores because certainly in AC, those results go fairly automatically into the world rankings. You don't need to get in touch with Chris Williams to tell him what's happened and here are the results.
I'm sure our Ballina Croquet Club Championships would go straight to the world rankings.
Well,
Absolutely.
you have a world ranking, Michael, and there might be others as well. But
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure club championships are excluded.
Yeah.
But other club events
It has to be an
that you
open
run
event.
would be included.
Sorry, I've had to come to Kate's because my mic's died. But just
That's all right.
two more things. One is if you do put up a club championship, you can actually put all the events within that one entry, so that you have the Ballina Club Championships and then you have the GC singles, GC doubles, things like that, just as
Okay.
parts of it. That means you don't clutter up the events list on Croquet Scores so much. And the
That's
second
great
thing,
advice.
and the second thing is, if you do stuff it up and you have to start again with a new event, make sure you go back in and delete the old one, because you can see a number of littered attempts where people have given up and started again, but that's just confusing on the list.
Yep.
And
Yeah,
finally,
well, that's why I thought I'd stick to the try croquet scores to start with. The
yeah,
first event, no
And
one's paying much attention over there.
and unfortunately, Tim Murphy has 300 items on his wish list, including sorting by country. And one day maybe
Right.
they'll all happen.
That would be nice.
Yes. So the next question is from Larry Bryant. You've talked about a competition with blocks and how to spread it, Larry. Did you want to talk to that? You'd need to unmute yourself if you're around. No?
You there, Larry?
No, okay. So Margaret, you've asked a question about handicaps and whether you let people with a different handicap into a competition. Do you want to talk to that?
Yes, in sort of when we run our club championships, we've got a few people who are on higher than 10s, but I've limited them to 10 and allowed them to play. And then when they fill in their handicap card, that causes a problem. How do they do it? Do they fill it in as a 10, or it sort of makes it a bit difficult? But rather
So
than
it's a
block them out
handicap.
altogether.
Sorry, so it's
A
a
handicap
handicap
event,
competition, but they're playing in a. I mean, really, you can't alter the handicap on your card, can you? You just have to play at that handicap.
It's a handicap competition. They're winning or losing 10 points anyway. So it doesn't
That's
matter.
right.
But
Doesn't
I
really.
agree
It
with
doesn't
you.
matter whether they're playing off a 10 or a 12 or even a 14. They're
We've
still
done
going
that.
10.
We've done that at Camaret in the birthday tournament over the years. We limited it to 12, but somebody on 16 wants to play, and I've said, okay, but you'll be playing off 12.
Mm.
That doesn't make any difference, because if they win the game, they get 10 points, and if they lose it, they lose 10 points off the index.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, thanks, Marg. So
Sorry, I
there's
should
a
say,
little.
though, that if including those players gives you more players than you're comfortable handling, they'd be the first on the list to be chopped, I would think.
Yeah.
Okay. There's been a little bit of talk about paperwork and how much paperwork you need, whether you need score sheets. I'm not sure if anybody wants to continue that conversation.
Oh, okay. For an AC event, where generally at most you can have 3 rounds in a day, they're going to be 2.5 hours apart. Players can be relied upon to write their result on a sheet which records all results, and you can enter it to Croquet Scores from there. You don't need individual game score sheets. I find that for GC events, where at Tempe, for example, there might be more than 40 games in a day, finishing at all different times because some are quick games, some are slow games. I find it very handy if I'm managing that event to have the individual game sheets filled out. It can be useful if there are, well, forget that, but it's just a good way of making sure that things are done properly.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, and I think Rick's question about the playoff getting one more shot was spoken to by David. Did you have anything further on that one, Rick? No? Okay.
Sorry, Kate, I missed the button.
Sorry, Rick.
No, I was just wondering if David means just wholly for GC or is he looking at that for AC as well? So I was involved in Division 2, so I thought it worked quite well.
So I think, David, we were talking about when time is called that you have a playoff. But obviously with AC, there's a protocol. Once time's called, both players have one more turn, and then they play for the final hoop if necessary. But in GC, that's innovative, isn't it? Sorry?
The question was the extra ball by each ball played extra after time, not a playoff. In other words, as David said, blue's played, then he goes around back to blue again. Is that going to replace the current AC method of end of time?
No, that's GC. That's a GC ruling only.
Thanks, Peter. David.
Yep.
Okay, cool. I think there's talk about the handicapper,
Yep.
which you have referred to, David. Was there anything further you wanted, Pauline, about handicapping?
It can be a difficult job.
Hang on, we'll just get Pauline. David, I'll just let Pauline clarify her question if that's okay. Go, Pauline.
I haven't seen this happen, but if there really was a situation, a burglar and how would a handicapper go about it, and to what degree would the intervention be, and how does that then impact on the scores of the results to date? And presumably somebody who goes in at whatever level and they get re-handicapped, presumably at a lower handicap, it might sort of really upset them. And so what are the dynamics of that as well as the logistics of it? Thanks, David.
Okay. I think one of the big problems we have is that handicappers, both club handicappers and tournament handicappers, don't exercise the powers they have often enough. And often when they do exercise them, they exercise them incorrectly. At least in AC, the rules for dropping somebody's handicap say that you should, at a minimum, drop them 2 levels. So a player who's on 20 and playing really well, there's no point dropping them to 18. They're going to get there tomorrow anyway. You must drop them to 16. And the way I do it is to say, Peter Freer, you've played beautifully this weekend, or these couple of games so far. You're clearly better than a 20. Congratulations, you're now a 16. That's terrific, you're improving your game and it's being recognised. Not too many people are unhappy about that approach. Whereas if you say to them, Pete, sorry mate, I'm dropping to 16, which means you get 4 less bisques next game you play, of course there's an opportunity to feel hard done by. So you've got to sell the decision. In truth, you are recognising that the player is better than somebody else thought they were, and you need to sell it that way. I've only once had a player say, I thought you were going to drop me down to 10 as well. And I said, well, no, I'll drop you from 16 to 12. This was a local Cooks River member because he was playing really well. He continued to play well and he would have liked me to drop him again, but I said, no, I think it's reasonable to let rapid improvers have the odd win on the way down and not to punish them too much. Plus, he'd only played handicap games at that stage. I knew that he played well when he got in by taking a bisque. I had no idea whether he was capable of getting in to start a turn without taking a bisque. So I had to think about that. I've dropped a number of people's handicaps in tournaments, and I've never had anybody really raise a complaint about it. They generally recognise.
David, you can do this mid-tournament.
Yes, you do it mid-tournament. The difficulty is if I'm playing in the tournament as well, and I see this person for their first game or the first two games, you'd probably want to watch a couple of games, play really well. They're a 16, but they make a beautiful 8-hoop 4-ball break. 16s can't do that by and large. Was that a fluke in the first game? No, he made a 9-hoop break in the second game without using any bisques. So I think I should drop this guy, but you look at the draw and realise you're playing him next. Not a very good political decision to drop him just before you play him. Wait till afterwards and then drop him. So be aware of what the thing looks like. But yes, you need to act. Occasionally, somebody will have been playing only a particular isolated club, and their handicap has come down because they're beating the same group of people that they're marginally better than. Their handicap's coming down and down because they keep winning games. They come to a tournament as a 5, and they're clearly more like an 8 when you look at how they play. And it's quite reasonable then to re-handicap them and probably to get in touch with the club handicapper and say, look, I've re-handicapped this player. Sorry, you should notify the club handicapper anytime you re-handicap a player. But particularly if you're raising their handicap and say to the handicapper, you really need to be doing your job and be understanding that you need to have people on appropriate handicaps if they're going to be playing elsewhere. Sorry, has anybody got...
Thank you. So there, Derek had asked about if there is a document which outlines what all the roles that you need in a tournament are. Would that be in the ACA tournament regulations? Or?
Oh, it's in the New South Wales has got a pretty... Certainly ACA has got one that as it relates to ACA competitions, and that tells you what you should do a year out from the competition, 9 months out, 3 months out, and a month out, and so on. The reality is with most local competitions, a month out, you haven't even thought about it yet, or maybe you have, but you're not doing much. So take that with a grain of salt. If you want a document that tells you how to manage a tournament, Croquet New Zealand produced a document of 64 pages, which I started reading and fell asleep. It's probably very good stuff, but it's way too detailed for somebody running a club tournament.
Yeah, I'll put those Croquet New South Wales documents on the resources area just to let people know all of this information will be under resources on the Croquet New South Wales website. So I'll put a link to the other documents that you need are useful. Okay. So there's a little bit of discussion about whether your club games need to be recorded on handicap cards, but that's a slightly separate issue perhaps. Is there anything else related to tournaments?
I think normally
sorry, who's
a club
talking?
championship. I'm sorry.
We go back a step.
Oh, well.
David,
Okay, go well, yep.
When you mentioned handicaps during a game, could you just clarify there are two different situations? One where you reach a trigger point and you automatically change, as against what you were discussing a minute ago, where you feel or you know the person is not handicapped correctly. Could you clarify those two?
Well, the same thing applies. An automatic change takes effect after the game in which you trigger, and your handicap triggers whenever you pass a trigger point going in, or reach a trigger point going in either direction. It might not actually change, but it triggers. So you might be on the appropriate handicap for an index of 1,000, what's that, 18 in AC. You improve, you get to 1,010, you're still an 18. You lose a few games, you go past 1,000, you trigger. What do you trigger to? 18, which is the handicap of that 1,000. You won't go back to 20 until you get to 950. You won't go to 16 until you get to 1,050. But what I always do at a handicap tournament is look at the cards as they come in, see what the last trigger point was that was crossed, and that's what the player's handicap should be. You can't tell just by looking at the handicap. Because on a handicap of 1,020, I can be either 16 or 18. 18 getting better or 16 getting worse.
Okay.
If you
So that
change, if you
in the
do a re-handicap, same thing applies. After the game, you re-handicap, and from then on for the rest of that tournament, the new handicap applies. The old results remain. You can't go back and rewrite results or rewrite points exchanged based on the new handicap.
No, but their extra turns on this change the next game.
Sorry, what was that?
I say the next game they play, they might change their extra turns or bisques, whatever the case may be, for the next game. Once you're handicapped.
The next game, yes.
Yes, the next game.
Next game.
Yes.
Even in the best of three match, that can happen. I think it'd be unlikely that you'd re-handicap in the middle of a best of three. But if you did, it should take effect immediately.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. We've now come to, it's just after 7 p.m. Were there any other burning issues that people wanted to raise before we draw the session to a close? I can't see any hands going up. Okay, so, sorry, Margaret, were you saying something?
No, I just put in one of our members who belongs to another club recently played in his other club's championship, and they never recorded anything on their handicap cards.
Yeah, well, my understanding...
I would think that it would be... Sorry.
No, you go on,
Kate.
David. No, you go on.
Okay. I think that club championships should be recorded on handicap cards, but I don't think there's any hard and fast rule. Peter Freer might be more familiar with what the AHS regulations say. Peter, do you know? Unmute.
He's on in the other room. In some of the championship events, people don't use their cards because they rely on world rankings, and that's recorded separately. But Peter Fred, do you want to say something?
Yes, all serious games should be on your card. That's the whole point of it. Your card's more meaningful the more games you have on. But obviously, if you're just playing a pickup match down with someone at your club, you don't put that down because it's not official.
That's anything that's in an organised event, be it a club event or a New South Wales event or an Australian event, should be on your card.
Yeah, I agree, but I was quite annoyed when this fellow came home and he said, "Oh, they don't record their scores on their handicap cards."
Oh, there you go.
Dob them into Gareth Denyer.
Right. I'll ring Gareth.
Okay. All right, everybody.
However,
thank you so much for attending.
We
Sorry.
don't have to agree with that, do we?
What's that one?
Because in club comps, you can have one person that's well outstanding above the others and quickly lower their handicap level, and suddenly they go out into the wide world and they're nowhere near the competition of the other people in the rest of the state or wherever. Club, that's a contentious issue.
Yes, I'm sure it is. All right.
Kate, may I just butt in and say thank you to you and David. I think these tutorials are brilliant. It's a really easy way for all of us all across the state to really get very valuable instruction, and I think it was wonderful. Thank you for your preparation and time to deliver. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Pauline. Yeah, I think we're still learning how to do these, and I'm sure we can be more groovy with the technology, but I think we need to have something that's achievable and that we're all volunteers, so we've got to do what we can. So, David, I really appreciate your time, and I commend David's document to people if you haven't read that, which has got, as he said, some more detail in there. And and you'll be very keen to see more tournament managers out and about, won't you, David?
Certainly will. The other thing I'd like to say is thank you to everybody for their participation and their questions. If you have other questions that you want asked that are too complex to answer here, feel free to email me at tournaments@croquet-nsw.org, and I'll try to get round to answering questions. Or I'll point you to the person who might be able to answer them for you. I've enjoyed the discipline of having to set down my thoughts. I've managed more tournaments than I've had hot breakfasts, I think. But I hadn't ever really set down what I did about them before. So last night I started on it. One of the things Kate, I didn't say to Kate in my little brief biography, was that I tend to be a bit of a procrastinator and do things at the last minute. So that might be good again.
You did a great job, David, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody. We're going to end the meeting now. Don't forget, next month on the 2nd of December, we're doing a workshop on lawn maintenance. It's going to be a little bit of sharing of information because we're not greenkeepers. We're just croquet players who take on roles regarding lawns. So we're going to gather 3 or 4 people and share their experience. So register for that one with the secretary email, and we'll see you then. So thanks again.
Can I just add one thing there? Particularly members of clubs in Sydney, come along to that Zoom, because we're going to be hoping to run the Air Cup and the men's and women's singles and so on in Sydney in March. We'll find out next week, I think, whether ACA are still planning on holding it. And we want clubs to have their lawns in tip-top condition. I understand Rob Elliott will be one of the panel for that workshop.
Yep.
Rob is brilliant at lawn maintenance and is well worth listening to.
Fantastic.
I thought that the lawns at Tempe were the best I've ever played on. They're fantastic.
They're great, aren't they?
They certainly are. Rob's doing a wonderful job.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, everybody, and good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.